33-year-old male found dead a few days ago. Someone amongst them is our killer.
A man's been stabbed to death after an argument with another driver.
It was one of the biggest criminal investigations in terms of resources for the Kent police that we've ever had.
Got to the roundabout and I just looked at him and I just knew he was dead.
Kenneth Noye is a professional criminal. He has resources and probably money that most of us could only ever dream of.
Police are describing the attack Steven Cameron from Swanley was killed in front of his girlfriend during an argument on a motorway slip road.
Steven turned away to walk away and the man went back and got a knife, came back and stabbed him. I just felt my heart was going to come out of my chest. It was just thumping and thumping, and I just couldn't understand, you know, what was going on.
He was kind, generous, funny. He was my best friend.
When your child leaves the house, you wave them goodbye, but you never think you're not going to see them again.
"21-year-old Steven Cameron lived in Kent with his family and worked as an electrician.
He was always teasing everybody. He was a very touchy-feely person. He had a way of coming up behind people and putting his arms around them and cuddling them. He always showed plenty of love.
My Steven had a fabulous personality. His attitude to life was absolutely fantastic. He was kind, generous, funny. He was my best friend.
He was full of life, great fun to be with, just happy-go-lucky.
Steven was in a long-term relationship with his childhood sweetheart, 17-year-old Danielle Cable.
Steven met Danielle when she was at a bus stop, and this is her words to me. He looked at me, smiled at me, and I fell in love with him. And we all had our own lives, but we all were a very close family. We used to see each other all the time and do things together, go away together. We just had a perfect life. You just take it all for granted. It just seemed to us a normal, happy family life.
Steven and myself, we used to go to golf, go and play pool. Where I worked, that's where Steven done his training, and I used to see him every day, all day. He was always coming around, and Dad, you haven't got £5 of it, I'm going to go and have some lunch. He used to tease the life out of me. We was really, really close.
He was starting his own business with his cousin. They were starting up an electrical business together. Him and Danielle and his best friend, Darren, were moving in together. They'd rented a house in Chislehurst and they had everything to look forward to. He had his life ahead of him and he was so happy.
But this happy family life would soon be shattered. Deep in the heart of the Kent countryside, just 10 miles from the Cameron family home, lived one of Britain's most notorious criminals, Kenneth James Noye. Kenny Noye was already well known to the British police and public, a notorious career criminal involved in the money laundering of the Brinks Mat stolen gold, the largest bullion robbery in British criminal history.
We knew he was a criminal. We didn't know him. We knew there was a book that had been written, the Brinks Mat robbery, which my husband had read and Steven also had read.
In November 1983, a highly organised South London gang of 6 armed robbers slipped into a maximum security warehouse near Heathrow and stole 3 tons of gold bullion worth a staggering £26 million. It was during the hunt for the missing gold that Kenny Noye was brought to the attention of the police. He was turning the gold into cash. But during the Brinks Mat investigation, he murdered undercover surveillance officer Detective Constable John Fordham in a frenzied knife attack, stabbing the officer multiple times in his chest. Sensationally acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, Noye was instead sentenced to 14 years in prison for his involvement in the conspiracy to handle stolen gold and VAT fraud. He was released early, 7 years later.
Kenneth Noye hadn't long been out of prison. I was unashamed in the way in which he went about his life. He didn't have much shame about the fact that he's got 14 years in prison for handling stolen goods, the gold from the Brinks mat.
And this dangerous criminal was to make headline news once more. The 19th of May, 1996, started as a seemingly normal Sunday for the Camerons.
They'd been out the night before and Stephen had been drinking. That morning, I had my 2 little granddaughters staying. They'd got in bed with Steven and Danielle and was laughing and joking, and he told them that he was going to have them as his bridesmaids, and he was describing to them what sort of dresses they would have. I was up early because my mother, who lived across the road to us, wasn't very well, and she was in bed and I was going to go shopping. Stephen got up and he said, you're going to cook my breakfast, jokingly, and I said no. I said, I'm off out. And he said, oh, come on, Mum, please do my breakfast. I said, no, don't be so lazy, you do it. The last thing he did was tell me he loved me. I left with the 2 granddaughters and took them shopping.
We had a cup of coffee together, had a little chat, told me what because he'd been out on the Saturday night to a club with his friends and sort of what have you, and he'd had a good night and what have you. And I think he was a little bit hungover, and so that's why Danielle was driving. And yeah, we had a laugh and a chat and whatever, yeah, as we always did. He said tease the life out of me.
As Stephen and Danielle got ready, they discussed their plans for the day.
Stephen was going up to London to buy some bagels for all his friends. They were all going to a football match that afternoon to watch Danielle's brother play football.
Stephen suggested to Danielle that she drive the Bedford van.
Danielle was driving because they'd been out the night before and Stephen had been drinking.
Danielle, never driven on a motorway in her life. She'd only just passed her test. Stephen decides that, Danielle, you can drive the vehicle, we'll go out and get some shopping. She was very reluctant to do that, but accepted that perhaps to please him she would drive it and get a motorway driving out of the way, as it were, but she wasn't very happy about it, especially a van.
It was on Sunday, it was about 1:10. I was watching the Monaco Grand Prix. Just started the warm-up lap and Stephen went off with Danielle.
The couple headed towards the motorway at Swanley. In less than an hour, their lives were changed forever. On Sunday the 19th of May, 1996, Stephen Cameron and his fiancée Danielle Cable were planning to meet friends. Having been out drinking the night before, Stephen suggested that his girlfriend should drive his van. A reluctant Danielle agreed, and they set off from their home in Kent to travel to London on the M25.
Stephen was on the phone to his best friend, Darren, who he'd known since he was about 4.5. And they were going to share the house together that week they were moving in. They were going to watch Danielle's brother play that afternoon. He also told Danielle he wanted to go and see his goddaughter because he was godfather, and he hadn't seen her for a little while.
They drove down Beech and Lee Lane in Swanley, where they lived, and towards the roundabout near the M25 motorway just a few miles away.
So she drives onto the motorway at the Swanley interchange. We think she cut somebody up or had taken someone's road. The Land Rover Discovery pulled across the front of the vehicle when they stopped at the traffic lights just prior to joining the motorway.
Outraged by this late lane change, the motorist stormed out of his vehicle and approached the van. Steven and Danielle had never seen him before. It was convicted criminal Kenneth Noye.
Danielle is in a dreadful state at the driver's wheel of this rascal van.
Terrified, Danielle had no idea why her driving had just triggered such a tirade of abuse from the other motorist. Steven stepped out of the van and approached the raging driver.
Steven wasn't even driving. He was just protecting his fiancée, which any man would do.
Steven Cameron came face to face with Kenneth Noye.
What he didn't know at the time, of course, was that the one person that he picked this gesticulation with was Kenneth Noye, a known criminal. There is a confrontation between Steven and Kenneth Noye at the front of the rascal van, of which Danielle saw the lot.
But the disagreement soon turned to physical violence.
The first punch would appear to have been thrown by Kenneth Noye, but whatever happened, Kenneth Noye was getting the worst of the confrontation that effectively he'd chosen to have.
As the argument escalated, Danielle tried to attract attention from passing motorists. Over 30 vehicles went by, but no one stopped. As the men continued to fight, it appeared that a younger and stronger Steven had managed to defeat Noye.
It was a busy lunchtime on a Sunday. I think possibly Brands Hatch, which was nearby, the racing circuit, might have been on. There was a lot of traffic about.
Instead of leaving, instead of just going, he goes back to his vehicle, to the passenger side, and comes back as Steven's coming back into the rascal van with what we now know is a knife. Danielle is screaming at Steven, he's got a knife, Steve.
Steven turned away to walk away, and the man went back and got a knife.
And the next thing you know, he's stabbed by Kenneth Noye, fatally in the heart.
Noye twice plunged the knife into Steven's body, puncturing his heart and liver. With the knife still in his hand, Kenneth Noye got back into his vehicle and drove off at speed. Steven had collapsed in Danielle's arms, covered in blood. The violent argument had lasted no more than a few minutes.
The only person who had the presence of mind to think about getting the registration number of the Land Rover Discovery was indeed Steven.
With Steven dying in her arms, a distressed Danielle phoned for an ambulance, and then Steven's father.
When Danielle phoned me, I just went into total panic mode. I don't even remember driving to the roundabout. I just got in the car and went. Just got there and I see Danielle, and she was as white as a sheet. She was really, really white, pale, and she was shaking like a leaf. So I sat her in the car and I went over to Steven and, yeah.
This vicious attack had happened just 5 minutes from Steven's home. Paramedics quickly arrived on the scene, but they were too late.
I just looked at him and just knew he was dead. He was as white as anything, and I just knew he was dead. They knew he was dead. That's an image that's actually burnt into my head. I can still see him laying there. I was numb. My body just felt totally numb. If anyone had said to me, if you were to see your son lying in the road and you knew he was dead, how would you react? I'd have said I'd have gone hysterical. I was as calm as anything. I suppose something just takes over, doesn't it? The adrenaline just takes over.
Ken drove back home to tell Tony.
Just as I'd got home, he rushed out the house and said to me, just get in the car. And I see Danielle was sitting in the front, so I got in the back with the two girls, not knowing what it was. And I always remember looking at Danielle, and she was staring straight ahead. Her face was as white as snow. And I knew by my husband's panic that something was wrong. And I remember my husband was driving frantically, and he said to me, Steven's been stabbed. I just felt my heart was gonna come out of my chest. It was just thumping and thumping, and I just couldn't understand, you know, what was going on. I remember phoning my son. I was panicking, and I thought, I've got to phone the two little girls' mum to tell them to meet us at the hospital, because I didn't want them to be there.
Danielle just sat there as quiet as anything. He's never said a word. Never said a word. And to that day, I've never ever spoke to Danielle what happened. She's never ever told me, and I've never asked her. I don't think I could put her through it.
We went into a small room and we all stood there just waiting for news.
I knew Steven was dead, but I couldn't tell her. I just couldn't tell her.
The doctor came in and he told us that they couldn't save our Steven. He'd died. I couldn't speak, I couldn't do anything. I just remember feeling numb. Everything was so normal that morning, and something like that just didn't seem real. And I couldn't believe that my Steven could have died. I just wanted to be with him, and they did allow us to go and see him. And I remember holding his hand, and, you know, I don't know how I felt. I just felt numb. I still can't believe that it was him laying there. I can't think how my husband must have felt, because he actually saw him. I was spared that, but I wish I'd have been with him though, because it'd be nice as a mother to be with him at that time.
But the one thing I always stuck in my mind, I can never remember seeing any blood. I can never remember seeing any blood at all. And he must have been covered in blood, quite truthful. Don't remember, it must be blanked out.
And then all of a sudden there's all these people around you, because a lot of Steven's friends had heard it on the news. They was all up at the pub, waiting for him to arrive, and that's when they got the devastating news. And naturally they all rushed over to us, our family. We had to phone family and friends that were close. When your child leaves the house, you wave them goodbye, but you never think you're not going to see them again.
Just yards from the M25 motorway, a murder hunt is underway after what appears to have been an horrific attack of so-called road rage.
A man's been stabbed to death after an argument with another driver. Police are describing the
21-year-old
attack
Steven
as a case
Cameron
of
from
horrific
Swanley was killed in front of his girlfriend during an argument on a motorway slip road.
Danielle, whose surname isn't being released by the police, had been engaged to Steven for 6 months.
As news of the tragedy started to break across the country, Kent police had the task of finding Steven's killer. They mounted Operation Quern.
It was one of the biggest criminal investigations in terms of resources for the Kent police that we've ever had. We had something like in excess of 30 witnesses who had been using the motorway, that junction, at the time, and each of them saw different parts of what happened. Danielle, of course, saw everything that happened. Out of all the witnesses that we had that saw, if not all the incident, but part of the incident, none of them got the whole registration number. None of them. The best we could do was really say it was an L-registered Land Rover Discovery. The colours were ranging from 5 different colours. It was a metallic vehicle. Perhaps the way the sun was shining on the vehicle that day, it wasn't too clear what colour it might have been. But in the end, we were in a very difficult position because there were so many different and conflicting numbers given to us.
Despite Steven's dying words of warning to remember the number plate, the criminal had fled the scene quickly. The police couldn't get any leads from witnesses, and the hope that cameras in the area may have picked up vital information also had to be discounted.
There was someone out there that had stabbed Stephen and I wanted them caught.
Although we had witnesses who could say what happened, nobody identified the person, no one knew who he was, and we were in a very difficult position because we didn't have any forensic evidence that would link a suspect to the scene. There is a CCTV camera at that junction, and on that particular day, the 19th of May, it was not working.
With no forensic evidence and no CCTV, Kent police were struggling to identify the M25 killer.
The man disappeared in what we knew was an L-registered Land Rover Discovery. Difficulty you had was, of course, we didn't have the entire registration number. The police national computer showed 18,000 plus L-registered Land Rover Discoveries, and they're only the legitimate ones that were registered in the UK. But when you spoke to the witnesses, we had about 5 different colours. The colours ranged from green to maroon to blue to grey to black. Very soon we realised that we were going to find it very difficult to find that particular vehicle. If you don't have that significant lead for a named person within the first 48, 72 hours, you know it's going to be an uphill task.
With no vehicle registration number, Kent police were struggling to identify the killer. Had Kenny Noye managed to get away with the brutal attack? Two months on from his murder, Stephen's funeral was held near to his home at St Mary's Church in Swanley. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects and say their final goodbye.
We had a house full of people and we both felt lonely. Well, you just try and keep yourself going, trying to be strong. I was trying to be strong for Tony. Tony was trying to be strong for us, for me. But you just go through the motions of life, don't you?
At the time, you're numb. I was doing things, don't remember what I was doing. It was as though I was standing up on the ceiling looking down at everybody.
After Stephen died, I tried to get on with my life the best I could. It was very, very difficult. I just couldn't work anymore. I needed a nervous breakdown. I just couldn't face going to work. I couldn't cope with work. If it hadn't been for Tony, I don't know what I would have done because she was an absolute brick.
I thought the person that would have done it would have been a random thing. Stephen had a van load of tools. He would never have used them. And as for carrying a knife, he would never have thought. I never carry a knife in my car. It didn't frighten me where the family was concerned, but it did worry me that he must be a villain or on drugs or some sort of evil person that was out there would use a knife. Because I know that Stephen would never have done it. He would have fought the fight, but he would never have stabbed anyone or killed anybody.
The grieving family's focus turned once more to the police investigation and finding the M25 killer.
A Land Rover travelling at speed overtook the van Stephen was in. When both vehicles stopped at traffic lights, he and the other driver began arguing. Then after a fight, Stephen was fatally stabbed. The ferocity of the attack has shocked police.
Why did this occur? Why would someone want to use such extreme violence to which is, after all, a fairly minor incident compared to some of the things we have to deal with?
There was lots of points where you think that he isn't going to get caught, he isn't going to get found. And that was the worst part, not knowing where he was. We wanted him caught. For Stephen's sake, we would have gone to the ends of the world for that to happen.
I did start to question if they would actually catch him in my own mind. I used to phone up Nick Biddis, the superintendent, and beat him up every week on the phone. I used to give him a hard time.
There is always a pressure for us to solve such dreadful crimes. There's pressures both from the police, as it were, the public, the media, and especially the family. I mean, Danielle's lost a fiancée. Ken and Tony, of course, they've lost a son.
Danielle was just 17 years old and Kent Police's key witness. They desperately needed her to help solve the murder.
Danielle was extremely cooperative and wanted, throughout, justice for Steven and the family and herself, obviously. She was always available for me to interview her or to get some information if there was anything, and I always kept regular contact with her, with Ken and Tony Cameron.
Danielle's emotions gave me the strength because I knew I had to help her. It was a sort of a motherly instinct, if you like, and I felt I had to be strong for her. To see someone you love stabbed to death and die in your arms, especially because she was so young and she was so hurt by it all.
Danielle provided the police with a description of the vehicle and Steven's killer, whilst intelligence was beginning to shed some light on the identity of the Land Rover owner.
There was information that came in relation to local criminals, which is not unusual in a murder inquiry. Kenneth Noye was the sort of guy that wouldn't hide away and would be part of his local community, be seen. It was suggested to us that he disappeared.
This key piece of intelligence shocked those involved.
I couldn't imagine anyone that would have gone back and got a knife, so I obviously thought it was some sort of villain to do something like that and to do it and run and not show any remorse. It might be road rage, but to me it was murder. We never for a moment imagined that he would have been there to have murdered Steven. It was 1,000,000 to 1 chance that he would meet such a criminal.
We were extremely surprised to think that somebody of Kenneth Noye's professional criminal standard would get involved in such a crime. But of course he's disappeared, so we need to look at it.
I didn't believe it. First off, I just could not believe it. A person with his stature in the criminal world at 1:20 of a Sunday afternoon would do such a stupid thing in broad daylight in front of loads of people. Because he's a person who's well known in the area. I just didn't believe it.
But Kenny Noye had realised the enormity of his crime. After stabbing Steven Cameron to death, he had raced back to his home, where he made a number of frantic calls, packed a suitcase with cash, and left.
Within 24 hours of the murder, his phone went dead. His mobile phone went dead. And of course, we had no means of finding out what communication he may have been using. Clearly he was using something, but we didn't have any way of monitoring it. We obviously searched his house. His associates and friends and his family claimed they hadn't seen him or he'd gone. Don't know where he was, but he'd had nothing to do with such a crime. Nobody would tell us anything. Nobody knew anything. Hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. He just disappeared off the face of the earth.
With the help of his underworld contacts, Noye was whisked across the channel by helicopter, fleeing the country.
We knew he had a criminal background. He had friends in the criminal world that would help him to stay away, and we knew he would have all these things to help him.
He was desperate to cover his tracks and raise as little suspicion as possible.
We then soon realised that Kenneth Noye not only had disappeared, but the Land Rover Discovery that he had been driving has disappeared. There was another, what we called a doppelganger vehicle, had been stuck on his driveway. This vehicle, which looked exactly the same colour and type of the one that we were looking for, was bought for cash, and that vehicle landed up on Kenneth Noye's driveway. I think it was put there so as if anybody was casually passing by to say that, you know, Kenneth Noye disappeared, but his vehicle's still on his driveway.
Very quickly, the press discovered the identity of the prime suspect and took a renewed interest in the story.
The press found out that we were looking to try and find Kenneth Noye, who was well known in media circles, and therefore it was a good story. Sells papers.
I think the police knew or thought it was Kenneth Noye for about 2 weeks after Steven died. And they were just looking for him. But I don't think they wanted it broadcast.
I didn't really want his name mentioned at all, because I knew that it could potentially harm any fair trial. No matter who the defendant is, they're entitled to a fair trial. And the next thing you know, it's on the Sunday papers, pictures, everything. Kent Police are after Kenneth Noye in relation to the M25 murders. Does anybody know where he is?
I found out Noye was the chief suspect when I bought the News of the World one Sunday morning, in which they was totally outrageous. They shouldn't have done that.
I suppose what I could say was it could have been as a result of the public knowing that, of course, made people aware and kept it in the minds of the public, kept the story and the case going.
The case was generating huge amounts of media interest. Reported sightings of Noye started coming in.
We had sightings of Kenneth Noye, or people who thought they'd seen Kenneth Noye, from all over the world. We went from Russia to Brazil. He'd gone to South America to have his face changed. Kenneth Noye is dead, definitely dead. And I said, unless I see his dead body and I have his fingerprints off it, I won't believe it. But there were sightings all over the place. I'm surprised he wasn't seen on the moon.
2 years into the murder investigation, Kent Police finally got a major breakthrough. They received reports that Noye was residing in Spain.
Noye kept a very low profile and, of course, changed his identity with a new passport in the name of Green. His lifestyle was one where he was living in a very remote house. He would be drinking in bars. He was keeping himself to himself, but clearly wasn't a hermit.
The police needed to confirm that the sightings were indeed that of Kenneth James Noye. But media intrusion into the investigation was making things difficult.
The problem I had was the minute I sent any officers abroad, it would only be 24, most 48 hours before the press found out. Eventually, I ran it as a secret inquiry. I sent the officers out there with the remit, all I need you to do is to go out there and see if you can see this guy and tell me whether it's Kenneth Noye. Don't forget that in 1984, Kenneth Noye had killed a police officer in the grounds of his house at West Kingsdown, and I've sent 2 officers out with absolutely no backup to a foreign country to see if they can find this man and identify him.
With their mission outlined, the undercover surveillance officers tracked Noye down to a bar.
Those officers actually knew Kenneth Noye because of obviously his previous convictions, and they gave me a positive response. It's definitely him.
It was a big major breakthrough, but it was sort of opening wounds up because 2 years on we were, settling down a little bit.
But bringing Kenneth Noye to justice was by no means straightforward.
We still hadn't got either any forensic evidence or anybody actually identifying Kenneth Noye as the person who stabbed Steven Cameron. The bottom line was that in order to link him with the crime on the 19th of May, I needed Danielle to identify him.
She actually was the only one that actually looked him in the eyes and saw him that day.
It was now up to Danielle to bring Steven's killer to justice. But 2 years after the stabbing, would Danielle be able to positively identify her fiancé's killer? After fatally stabbing Steven Cameron on a busy motorway slip road, notorious criminal Kenneth Noye fled the country. It sparked an international manhunt to bring him to justice, a manhunt that lasted over 2 years. Having finally located Noye in Spain, Kent police now needed to positively identify him as Steven's killer. There was only one person who was capable of doing that, the only person who witnessed the entire murder, Steven's fiancée, Danielle Cable.
The identification out in Spain was, in my view, the most significant point of the whole investigation. Clearly, if she didn't identify the person out there, who we knew was Kenneth Noye, as the person who had killed her fiancé, Steven Cameron, then the whole case in terms of Kenneth Noye would have fallen apart. And I kept regular contact with Danielle, told her, you may have to go somewhere outside this country to try and identify the person responsible.
When the police came round to see us and inform us that Danielle had actually been taken away on a plane to identify the suspect, it came as a shock because we had no idea that they were that close to catching him.
He didn't tell us where. He just said Daniel was on the plane as I speak to you at the moment. We think we found him. I was elated. Cried my eyes out.
Oh, I was really concerned. I was really worried about her because I knew she would be upset. I knew she'd be frightened.
Of course, there were dangers in doing that. There were dangers for her welfare, so much so that when we eventually decided that she'd have to go out there to do this, I decided to do it in as public an area as possible. What we were trying to avoid was, if you like, a one-to-one situation. Fortunately for us, he went out to a restaurant where it was absolutely packed. Danielle was able to look through a window and she was positive in that identification.
Nick Bidis phoned us and said, we've got him, she's ID'd him, it's him.
It's about 2 years after Steven died, which was an eternity, but it actually found him.
We were then able, as a result of that identification, to obtain a warrant for his arrest in the UK.
Within 24 hours, Kent police were granted a warrant for Kenneth Noye's arrest.
Kenneth Noye was a creature of habit, and he was a person who frequented much the same bars in the Barbat area. And he was located in a particular bar where he was sitting outside on the seafront, and he was accompanied by a young lady. The Spanish authorities were actually fully briefed as to Kenneth Noye's previous convictions and his previous history as regards his violence towards officers. And they, I can assure you, took no chances when it came to arresting him. He was very quickly grabbed, immobilised, handcuffed and taken into custody.
With Noye arrested, the process for his extradition back to the UK began, a lengthy process that would take a year to complete.
It was for the British courts to decide whether it was being dealt with in accordance with the law, and they granted it, and he was duly extradited 3 years almost to the day that the crime had been committed. Initially, he claimed he had nothing to do whatsoever with the incident on the M25 on the 19th of May and knew nothing about the murder of Steven Cameron, and that the British police were after him because of him being acquitted of murder of a police officer. That was his claim. Once he was brought back to the country, he then accepted that it was indeed him that had killed Steven Cameron on the 19th of May, but that it was in self-defence.
He had to hold his hands up. Yes, I was there, it was me, but it was self-defence. But it was never self-defence. Steven wasn't carrying a knife, he was the one carrying a knife.
4 years after killing Steven Cameron, Kenneth Noye stood trial at the Old Bailey. He pleaded not guilty.
It's very important to go to the trial and see him face the music and see justice done.
The first time I saw Kenneth Noye in court, I wanted him to be dead for killing my son.
Stabbing him twice, he intended to kill him. And I just wanted justice for Steven. That's all I've ever wanted.
When he gave evidence at court, he said that he believed he had to leave the scene, leave the country, because the police would make sure that he got convicted of a crime he never committed, and therefore he wasn't going to hang around and wait to be arrested.
He was trying to make out that Steven was the violent person, that it was in self-defence. He even said in court that he thought Steven was going to throw him over the bridge and all sorts of silly things he came out with.
But it was Danielle's witness statement that would be of crucial importance.
The key part to this case, and the one that linked it all together, was the identification of Kenneth Noye by Danielle Cable. Forensically, there was nothing there, and unless we had somebody who could identify the person who stuck the knife into Steven, then we would never have got a conviction.
Part of his defence was that he had been identified unlawfully by Danielle. It was proven that it wasn't. Danielle was a key witness, and the one thing she always said was that his eyes, evil eyes, and that's what she see when she went out to Spain and see him, his evil eyes. That's when she knew it was him.
Kenneth Noye was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Steven Cameron. He would have to serve a minimum term of 16 years before he could be considered for parole.
At the time, I felt elated that he'd been found guilty, but I felt deflated that life didn't mean life, because he got 16 years. To me, he should never come out. He doesn't deserve to be out. He showed no remorse. I feel that Steven got justice because we caught the person that did it, but I don't feel that there's justice, the fact that he's going to one day walk free and have some sort of life.
I don't know where she is now. I don't know what her identity is, and neither do I need to know. All I want to make sure is that she can get on and lead the rest of her life in a happy way and a content way.
We haven't seen Danielle since 1998, and we absolutely loved Danielle. She was a wonderful little girl. She really was a wonderful little girl, and we both miss her.
She was a very brave girl to have done what she did, because she could have easily turned around and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to get involved in it because it's likely to be a problem." But I think she's a very brave girl and should be given all credit for that.
Me personally, I think the law now should be that anyone who carries a knife, is caught carrying a knife, should be put in prison. It's treated totally different to gun crimes, which I think people die with knives and people die with guns. Why is it treated totally different to gun crimes? Steven would have been a fantastic father, absolutely fantastic father. We'd have had fantastic grandchildren with him, which we've been totally denied by an evil man.
You live your life, but you're not happy. Inside, your heart's broken. No one can mend that.
Our son Michael can't even talk about Steven. He can't face that his brother's dead. You know, but yeah, everyone's got on with their life, which, you know, we've had to get on with our life. You have to, don't you? Life goes on. But you don't stop mourning, you don't stop missing Steven. I miss him every day, all day.